So what we're talking about here today is our MRSS feed utilities with Iconic. And we have a couple different utilities. The first piece that we want to talk about is bringing content into Iconic if you have an MRSS feed. Then the second thing we're going to talk about is how you can work with that content and build new MRSS feed type deliveries within Iconic. And then finally, how to be able to generate new MRSS feeds from Iconic outbound. So where this comes from is we've worked with a number of clients over the years who've dealt with MRSS feeds, and a lot of the companies out there that host these feeds or generate these feeds will tend to charge content owners per piece of content under management per month, which of course can get very, very expensive, especially if you have hundreds or thousands of pieces of content that you'd like to be able to distribute in this way. Conversely, in the world of Iconic, you can have as many assets as you want, and there's never any charge per asset for having content within Iconic. You're simply paying a monthly user fee and then paying for your storage cost of the storage that you already own to have that attached. So it's a much more economic way of managing and distributing MRSS feeds. So the first step in this process is being able to import or migrate an MRSS feed into Iconic. And what we're going to do for that is it's going to be all about an MRSS metadata mapping. Within this MRSS metadata mapping, what we're going to do is put in the actual name of the MRSS tags on the left side here. And then we're going to match these MRSS tags up to Iconic fields on the right-hand side. And you'll see some of these things might even have multiple tags that go to the same field. So for example, if the feed has a media and then title, then that'll go to the Iconic title. But also in this case, for this client, if that MRSS feed had a Tricos title, that would also map to the title field. If both of these existed, then whichever one we found second essentially would override the first one. But that's okay usually, because the whole point is that it should be the same title in both places, and we're just looking to make sure we find it in either location. So once all of these fields have been entered from what your incoming MRSS feed is to the fields that exist within Iconic, then to be able to actually import that field, to import that MRSS feed is something that we are going to normally just be either, the most simplest way we're normally doing that is we're just watching a folder to be able to do that. Or what we're going to do is we're going to normally create an Iconic collection. So if we take a look at this feed here, you can see this feed has 2,731 items. This is a MRSS feed that existed on another platform and was imported into Iconic. And the way that happened was in the MRSS feed metadata view, there's an MRSS feed address. So here is the address of the feed as it existed on another platform. And then we have that metadata mapping field name. This is the field we just looked at that displayed that mapping of fields from the MRSS to the fields in Iconic. And once those two items are selected here, all we have to do is come up here and we would execute a workflow that says migrate MRSS feed. Now at the moment, we're not seeing that. And the reason why we aren't seeing that is because for safety purposes, you don't want your users to actually be doing that after you're done doing your migration. So we've actually disabled it on this one because we're looking at a client system. And the reason why we're looking at a client system in this demo is the most powerful thing about MRSS feeds is normally working with lots and lots of content, hundreds or thousands of clips. And I don't have the ability to generate that of sample content very quickly or easily. But yes, that's basically all it would be to be able to migrate the MRSS feed in, and the results look just like this. So everything comes into a collection, and if we go into any of these pieces of content, we can see that we have a whole bunch of metadata that came in from that MRSS feed. And on the file side, we see that we have a lot of different files. So we have the original content, we have subtitles files, we have the proxy on the Iconic side, and then we have another section of subtitles as well. So once all this content is in Iconic, now we want to look at how we can generate new MRSS feeds. And for this, we have a couple of different options as well. So the first thing that we can do is go into our admin section and our metadata fields. And within our fields, we're going to see a couple fields here for MRSS mapping. So you can create one or more metadata fields here to generate various different metadata maps for various different clients or outputs. This is the simplest way to be able to do it. At the same time, it does come with some restrictions. So there's a base MRSS format that we generate, and then using this metadata mapping, you can update what values are going to go into the different components of that MRSS feed. So for this one, for example, we did a sample that's just going to be 3 simple fields. So it'll be a really minimal MRSS feed that gets generated here, versus this one down here has a whole bunch of fields and has certain things that might be named differently than how someone else might name it. So as much as MRSS tends to have some standards to it, those standards still tend to be interpreted differently by different organizations you're delivering to. So it's important to have this flexibility. So with a little bit of training, and we have plenty of documentation, it's not difficult to be able to come in here and adjust how this MRSS feed is formatted. Once you have that formatting complete, all you need to do is come into a collection that you want to send out. And within the MRSS feed section here, there's a place to choose the MRSS metadata mapping field name. And if we wanted to use one of these, we would literally just copy this name right here, paste it into there, and now when we generate an MRSS feed, it's going to use that map. So that's the basic way of doing it. The more advanced way of doing these MRSS feeds is we found that beyond just making some simple changes, there are times where you're going to have customers or partners that require core components of the MRSS feed to be created in a way that's a little more unique to their specific business or their specific way they want to receive things. So instead of making it a little extra complicated in that process, what we do is we offer a service to generate template files for you, or we have a tremendous amount of documentation around how to generate template files. And what these template files look like is this. And it can be a little overwhelming at first to take a look at, but there's not actually too much of this that you need to be too concerned with. I'm trying to find some coloring here that might actually help. It's not really any of these. Oh, there we go. Let's do XML. No, those other ones look better. Let's do that. So what we care about here is in this template file, at the top, you just have a list of all the namespaces. It's very common that one of the requirements that may change from client to client or partner to partner you deliver these to is they might require different namespaces to be added in here. In this case, you literally just add the name of the namespace equals the value that they want it to be, and now that'll show up properly in the actual MRSS feed that gets generated. Then down here, we have things like each asset within assets, which can tell you that basically everything in here is going to happen for each asset. So for example, you can see things like description, description short, format name that we're going to include, each thumbnail that we're going to include. And in this case, we have some samples where we say, look for portraits or portrait misspelled or portrait spelled correctly, because we realized that when some of these assets were added to the system, they were spelled differently. And then you have a primary section down here that's normally going to be pretty similar across the board, just with different metadata fields, where in here you can just say, list out basically all the different metadata fields that you want to utilize within your feed. Now, again, as part of our service, whenever we deploy this workflow, we will create the first set of all of these for you. We also will provide training on how to adjust these so that you can adjust them yourselves and make sure you're comfortable with it. And then if you have an active support contract with us, we will be happy to continue to create these for you as those needs arise and make adjustments. But we also are happy to provide that training so you can become self-sufficient and be able to do it yourself. So once you have that, the way we use this is now in Iconic, we go to a collection that we want to distribute outbound, and we're going to take that template and we're going to just throw it onto an S3 bucket. And that S3 bucket could be in something like Wasabi, like in this case, or that S3 bucket could just be an Amazon S3 or any other flavor of S3. And then we're going to turn on the switch use template, and then we're just going to come up here and we're going to click create MRSS feed. Once you do that, that's going to run and it's going to generate a link down here for MRSS, and this is what you're going to send outbound. So if I copy this link and I just paste that directly into Chrome, you can see an example of what this output looks like. So if we just move this over a little bit here and move this over here. So what you're seeing is for every asset in this collection, we now have an entry in the feed, and this entry includes all the things that were in the template that was selected. So the title, the description, some specific things as far as some specific metadata fields. And then for the media part itself, you can see you have the actual MP4 video file here. You have this portrait tag that we were talking about. And then you have the thumbnail tag, all pointing to the proper content. And part of how it found that portrait in those thumbnails is that inside of the asset records, what we have is relationships. So part of your template can tell us how you want to get to any related assets, because it's a very common thing in an MRSS feed that you're not just normally sending a single video file. It's more common you're going to be sending a video file with some level of thumbnails and images alongside it. So what you're going to do is take those thumbnails or other images that you need to deliver and create relationships. And then once you create those relationships, which can be named whatever you want, whatever's going to make sense for you and your organization, quite frankly, once you create those, then that's just going to go into the template so that it can be formatted the way that your endpoint needs it formatted. And this is the end result, is that for each item that was connected to that asset record, we have those files added right here. And then again, we have the other metadata all down here, and everything is formatted properly. The other thing that we offer is a MRSS feed viewer. And so what I can do is I can take this link, and if I want to get a sense more of what this looks like, I can go to our MRSS feed viewer, paste that link into here, and hit enter. And it's going to pull up and display this MRSS feed. And I can play these back.
Show, we're going to build.
I can navigate through them. Of course, I chose a weird one that I actually wasn't able to see. But you can choose what metadata you want to display here and all sorts of different things. Usually, most clients aren't looking for us to actually build out how they want to display their MRSS feeds, but this is a really good tool really about checking your feeds so that you can make sure what you know your client or partner is expecting is going to be in there. You know you're seeing it come through in an actual MRSS feed player so that you can kind of validate and test and know that everything's looking good. So this is something that we offer as just an add-on as part of this workflow so that so you can do that testing. And I think that's about it as far as working with MRSS feeds. Again, it's very flexible, gives you a lot of different options about how you can do this, and we've seen pretty good results throughout so far with the couple times that we've had this deployed or have been working with clients who are looking to work with MRSS feeds. So, any questions? Let's see if anyone has any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat or just unmute. So yeah, so an answer to.
Hey, Jason.
Oh, hey,
Jason.
Brian.
Hey.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
I missed half of what you said earlier. You started saying the most powerful thing about MRSS feeds is. Do you remember what that was? Can you reiterate that?
So I'm not exactly sure what I was thinking at that moment, but I can tell you the most powerful thing about having these MRSS feeds is that you have the ability to generate a feed that you can send outbound. People can plug into their playout server, and then you can update it as needed, but it doesn't stay linked necessarily directly to everything you're doing in Iconic. So once you've created that feed, you can now send that feed out for people to be able to use for distribution, to put into their players or their playout servers, and they're going to get exactly what you created at that moment of when you generated the feed with that set of metadata, that set of information. And the nice thing is that you can format these feeds differently for every different customer so you can meet their spec, which is what they always want. Most places you're delivering a MRSS feed to don't want your spec. They want you to conform to their spec. And so that's the nice thing about using these template files that we work with, is that once you have it dialed in, now you know that all you got to do is drop things into the collection, make the relationships the way you want to make them, and click that generate MRSS feed button, and you know you're going to generate it exactly the way they need it. Hopefully that makes sense.
And yeah, it does. And then further on that, if you have ongoing deliveries to a particular endpoint, if you just continue to add new content into that collection, does it automatically update the MRSS feed out to that endpoint?
That's a good question. No, it does not. And it's very intentional that it doesn't, because you don't want someone to accidentally add a bunch of the wrong thing or accidentally remove the collection or mess up the collection, and that brings down the feed. But what does happen is once you have created a feed, every time you click create feed after that point, it will always update the same feed. So it will never create a new link. Each time you click create feed, it is updating the existing link. And you can see that actually, that if we take a look at the link that was generated here, the link that's generated is based on the actual collection ID in Iconic. So that's how you can also always trace back from any existing live MRSS feed exactly where that feed came from to be able to get back to it. But yeah, it doesn't update automatically. We could offer that, quite frankly, pretty easily, just as a quick automation to be able to say, automatically run this update every time someone clicks the save button, or automatically run this update once a day or once a week or however frequently you want. But more commonly, we've seen people want to have a little more control over kind of clicking the button, because as soon as you do that, that content goes live.
And just one more to pile on. When you're managing that collection over time, do you just continually add new content into it and it just grows and grows and grows, or do you clear it out and add new content, deliver that set?
So I think that comes down a little bit more to the business case scenario than a tactical scenario. So for example, we have customers who will use this to deliver sets of content to multiple distributors in different territories, for example. And when they do that, it is normally just adding on, and the set is just getting larger and larger and larger. However, we've also had people use MRSS feeds to do things like feeding out to a closed network like channel for something like going out to digital signage within stores. And when you're doing something in more the digital signage side of things, they want to maintain fresh content. And so in that case, what they'll do is actually generate entire new collections, or take that one collection and create like sub collections for the history, and they'll move content that's been in the collection for over a week or 2 weeks or a month or whatever they determine that kind of expiration period is, and they'll move it out of the main collection into a sub collection so they can track the history of what has been presented, but maintain only current content in the primary collection that's actually feeding the MRSS feed. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Yeah, it does. Thanks.
All right. Any other questions? John, I know you've got to have some technical question on all this. No?
I unfortunately missed half of the conversation as well, so I didn't want to ask questions you may have answered. But maybe, how do you handle updates, polling, refreshes?
When we're bringing in an MRSS feed?
For updating the content in the feed.
For updating content in the feed. Yeah, that's what we were just talking about, is that by default, to update content in the feed, what you're going to do is just click on this and execute the create MRSS feed again. And what we're doing is every time we generate that feed, I was saying the feed address is directly related to the Iconic collection ID.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just MRSS collection dash and then the collection ID. So that feed address is never going to change. So every time you execute create MRSS feed, it's going to update the existing address. And you can set that to happen on a regular scheduled basis if you want. But by default, we just run it manually.
Got it.
So,
and then do you have a list of the templates you've already generated, like which feeds you already cover?
So right now, actually, the majority of them are the ones that you're seeing in here, specifically for MIM TV and Zumo are two of the ones that we've done most recently. We imported feeds from Trisynth and this Dark Matter TV, and a lot of those worked with Otera and Otera's, a little bit of Otera's standards, but Otera, in some ways, they have their standards, but they're also more frequently conforming to the standards of whoever their clients are delivering outbound to. And that was the one key thing that we learned throughout this process, especially with this client that we're looking at here, is that while there are standards around it, everyone you deliver to has their own unique twist on those standards that they believe are standard, that are slightly different from what someone else believes is standard. And that's why we implemented the templating.
Absolutely. I know that.
Everyone's standards are a little different than everyone else's.
Yes, redefining standards every time.
Exactly. So, cool. Well, yeah, I think that's probably it for this for today, unless anyone has any other last minute questions. And then otherwise, happy to follow up and you know, answer anything else as it comes up, and we can go from there. Cool. All right, guys. Well, thank you very much for attending, and we will publish this on the website so it's available. All of our webinars are always getting published up here at workflowwin.com. And within here, there's the Win Workshops section. And this is where you can see all of our past workshops. And this one will get up there hopefully within the next couple of days. And by all means, let us know. Oh, one last thing is, what should we look at next time? So our next workshops that we're looking at, 1 second here. Let me pull up the list. All right, so the next ones that we had are going to be either Slack notifications. We do Save Search Slack notifications as well as other Slack notifications. So we're going to do a webinar that's covering those and talking about all those different options. We have an option to do one on P5 archiving and how to integrate LTO archiving into an iconic workflow. And then we also have one coming up on hybrid transcoding. And then one coming up on auto scaling transcoding. So out of those, I'm curious, anything, Brian, there that specifically strikes you as being more interesting than any of the other ones?
Oh, way to call me out, Jason. No, there's not one that stood out particularly. They all sound interesting.
How about you, John? Anything there sound more interesting of one versus the other?
I'd be interested to see how you're scaling transcoding.
Yeah, the auto scaler one is definitely an interesting one. So we might do that one next. The auto scaler is one in which we're leveraging media convert inside of AWS and automatically scaling up the instances so that basically it removes the need to ever use the iconic transcoders. If you're paying for more than 3 or 4 of those iconic transcoder instances, this can help reduce cost and increase performance usually, and be able to provide something that that can just be really, really fast for ingest of most formats. So yeah, so we'll see. We'll probably announce what the next one's going to be here in the next couple of days, and should have that ready for end of next month. So, all right. Well, thank you very much again for attending, and yeah, we'll be in touch with everyone soon.